now moving on to the third panel of the day, Pathways to Decarbonization. Before we begin, we're pleased to remind our viewers that this panel has a live Q&A component in Whova, following the opening comments. And I'm delighted to introduce the session sponsor, Petronas, to welcome our moderator and panel.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's discussion on decarbonization. My name is Tom Horvath, and I am the Manager of Indigenous Relations for Petronas Canada. I want to acknowledge the Treaty 8 territory where this conference is centered, and recognize the homeland of the many diverse First Nations and Métis people whose ancestors have walked this land since time immemorial. We are grateful to live, work, and learn on this traditional territory. For those who are not familiar with us, Petronas Canada is among the largest natural gas resource players in the country. A significant aspect of our business model is working collaboratively with the communities where we live and operate. That doesn't just mean providing jobs and supporting community initiatives. It's also about generating opportunities for economic participation so that the benefits of our projects create long-term opportunities for the people and communities where we work. We are looking forward to growing those partnerships in the years to come. Petronas Canada has been a proud sponsor of the BC Natural Resources Forum for more than 7 years, and we are excited to be the panel sponsor for this important dialogue on pathways to decarbonization. Carbon emissions aren't contained to the jurisdictions where they are released, and neither are the innovative solutions. Whether it's low carbon LNG from the world's lowest emission liquefaction facility in British Columbia, or blue ammonia with the carbon captured and stored by world-leading experts in Alberta, responsibly produced natural gas as a feedstock for low carbon energy represents an incredible opportunity for British Columbia and the world. This discussion aligns with Petronas's beliefs and commitments that natural gas development in British Columbia, in collaboration with the BC government, Indigenous peoples, and local stakeholders, plays a critical role in delivering innovative solutions to a global challenge. Today's panel will be moderated by Tim McMillan. Tim is the outgoing president and CEO of the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, and no stranger to the issues surrounding decarbonization. During his tenure at the helm of CAPP, Tim has faced countless changes and challenges, including shifts in power in the federal government and countless provincial elections. Consistent across all of these changes has been growing pressure to transition to a lower carbon economy. Finding alignment between all of CAPP's members might be considered an impossible task to many, but it is something that Tim handles admirably, and no doubt his facilitation skills will come in handy today. With that context, I look forward to the panel discussion and will now hand the program over to our session moderator, Tim McMillan, President and CEO of the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. Thank you and enjoy the session.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Tom. Very much appreciate the introduction and the support for this conference. It's been a very important conference to our organization for several years, certainly for the time that I've been at CAPP. Good afternoon, everyone. I have the pleasure of being the moderator for the technology panel on how we reduce emissions. And I'm very fortunate to have 4 very capable and thoughtful panelists that'll share their thoughts with us as we get into the panel itself. As Tom noted, I'm the president and CEO of the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, and we'll be leaving this role here in a few months. But for the time being, very proud to represent about 80% of the oil and gas produced in Canada, and to participate on their behalf in this conference and on these very important issues, which we're going to talk about today. I'm not going to go in and read the biography of our 4 panelists, though that is provided through this website, but just a quick reflection before I go to each of them for some opening comments. And the order in which I will do that will be first Lana Eagle. She is a director of Geoscience BC, but certainly brings far more than that to this panel as a leader in the business and Indigenous community. And I think we'll be asking her for some of her insights on all of those topics. The next panelist which we'll ask to speak is Scott Volk. Technology and Innovation Lead for Tourmaline Oil Corporation. The third will be David Bennett, who is the Director for Renewable Gas with FortisBC. And our fourth is Ben Goodyear, Head of Bio Innovation and Tech for Canfor. So I think very representative of the talent and skill of the BC resource sector, tapping into some of the biggest capacity that we have as an industry and as a country to meet these big challenges head on. So without any further lead in, I'm going to ask Lana if she would take the floor and give us her opening comment. Lana, please.
Well, thank you very much, Tim. Feedbacks, I'm not sure why that is, but oh, that's better. Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be here today. And I just want to start by acknowledging that I am calling in from Campbell River. Many of you may have visited us here on the island, but it's also within the traditional territories of the Quayaka, the Wewe-Kai, and the Wewe-Kam First Nations. And I love Campbell River, and it's been okay being isolated here on the island, but I can tell you that I really do miss face-to-face. And so it is almost face-to-face, but not quite, calling in today. It was funny because I opened my notes to sort of go over what I wanted to say, and I couldn't read my own handwriting. And what jumped out to me was not pathways to decarbonization, but pathways to decolonization. And I thought, how appropriate, because really, if you're doing it properly and you are working collaboratively with First Nations and you are working collaboratively with government in a way to find solutions, to find a pathway forward and to make this achievable, it really is through a lens of decolonization. So I wear many hats, and I'm here today as a director of Geoscience BC, as well as an Indigenous person living here in the province of BC. I'm originally from Saskatchewan, and my home nation is the Whitecap Dakota Nation. So how do we move forward together? And I think that really is a start of it and a question that we should all be asking. I would say that if you are not engaging face-to-face, engaging heart-to-heart with communities, you're not really working together. And so simply going in and informing a community of where you are and where you intend to go is not enough. I think we need to do it differently, and we need to take information from communities that they're willing to share with us and be able to build a project around those ideas. And they may start out as issues and concerns, but I think if we look at how we could possibly work together, such as marrying Western science with traditional knowledge and looking at solutions, we heard about that earlier today, finding solutions to problems, I think that we can do that remarkably well. And in so doing, our path to decarbonization becomes one of a pathway to decolonization. So with my Geoscience BC hat on, I just want to talk a bit, for those of you that may not be familiar with Geoscience BC, I just want to give you a little bit of about who we are. We generate independent public geoscience research and data about British Columbia's minerals, energy, and water resources. This advances knowledge, informs responsible development, encourages investment, and stimulates innovation. Our collaboration with the resources sector, academia, communities, Indigenous groups, and government develops and shares unbiased and credible earth science research and data. Geoscience BC is a not-for-profit society incorporated under the BC Securities Act. So I'll give you an example if you're not sure how we might do that. We, a few years ago, had or worked on a project that was in the northeast of BC. And really what we were doing was, I'm going to turn my notes here, if I can read my notes. It was in the Clark Lake area. So we were looking at how possibly this could generate geothermal power. And you can read about this more on our website of how we actually went about it. But the outcome of that was the Fort Nelson First Nation, in whose territory this project was within, took that information, that data, and from that are in the process of creating one of Canada's first geothermal projects. And they have since renamed the CAPP Geothermal Project. So this information that we were able to generate through our research was collaboratively shared with Fort Nelson First Nation. So this gives you an example of how we can work together. Another project that's in the works right now is the Garibaldi Geothermal project, and it's in the area around. I lost my train of thought here, but it is located north of Whistler in that area. And again, it's an opportunity to work with local Indigenous communities with the prospect of developing that project further. And we are working on that in collaboration with Geoscience, the Geological Survey of Canada. So this is what I'm talking about, and that we can bring in Indigenous communities to work on projects to turn them into something, but it wouldn't be able to start without that initial information that we are able to generate through our research. And Geoscience BC has numerous other projects that we've been working on, not only in geothermal, but in water, oil and gas, and mining as well, mineral exploration. So I'm a firm believer that early engagement works in terms of bringing in Indigenous communities into a project, just as public geoscience works in generating a project with information as we go forward. So it would seem to me that these two can work together to create an equitable situation for creating wealth, and an equitable situation for managing resources within the territories of Indigenous people in BC.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Lana. That's great for kicking us off. The next speaker, we're going to ask Scott Volk if he would go next. Scott?
Great. Thank you very much, Tim. As Tim mentioned, my name is Scott Volk. I'm the Technology and Innovation Lead here at Tourmaline Oil. I'll give a quick introduction to Tourmaline and then a little bit of information on kind of how we fit into the panel and how our expertise can be used to decarbonize the natural resource sector in BC. So Tourmaline is not necessarily a household name, but we are Canada's largest natural gas producer. We produce in 3 core areas: Deep Basin in Alberta, Peace River Arch in Alberta, and Northeast BC. With all those areas, we make up approximately 11% of Canada's natural gas production. We like to own our own infrastructure, so we kind of end up being a pretty large midstream company as well. We think that's part of being a low-cost operator, being a low-emissions operator, is to have control of the gas all the way through the value chain. So I'll talk a little bit about what's important to Tourmaline, and then we can kind of talk about as far as emissions and environment, and then we can get a little bit more into how we really think we can be quite helpful in helping Canada and the world hit its emissions reduction targets. So one of the first things I want to kind of talk about is it's not just purely about GHG and emissions. We recycle a lot of water. We recycle 90% of our flowback water and produced water, and we think that's critically important. I know the world is really pushing on greenhouse gases right now, and that's appropriate, but we think there's also a bigger part to the community and to emissions reduction or being a good citizen on the planet, which includes water recycling. One of the key pieces we do in order to reduce our emissions is we displace diesel fuel and other high carbon fuels. We like to use our own natural gas when that's available, or electricity, or whatever the option is as far as reducing that diesel fuel. So we're displacing over 1.4 million liters of diesel fuel per year in our own operations. We're quite proud of that. We're kind of groundbreaking, and to date we've displaced over 15 million liters of diesel fuel. Again, something we're very proud of. And I think as we kind of get more into the topics of this conversation, we'll hit on things like methane and CO2 abatement, which I think the technology and the innovation that we've been working on has really been focused in some of those spaces, and we can kind of speak to that a little bit more here. So from a methane point of view, we've been a huge innovator in the methane mitigation space. We've been doing research into things as far as methane detection, things as crazy as satellites in space and fixed wing aircraft and continuous monitors. So that's a big piece of what we're doing. We do a lot of that work at the Emissions Testing Center, which is at our site but ran by the Natural Gas Innovation Fund. So we do a lot of work there. We do a lot of collaboration with Lana and Merck. Merck is the Methane Emissions Reduction Collaborative, which is a collaborative between the BC government and industry to kind of work on methane mitigations. So with all that work that we've been doing, we have actually hit our target 3 years early. So we've got a 25% rate, or we had a 25% reduction in emission from 2013 levels that we hit already. And that's an absolute target. Given our growth profile, that's a really big achievement. So if you kind of think about that more as a carbon intensity, that's closer to 35-40% to getting really close to the current targets that the government's setting out. The next piece I want to talk to you is about CO2. We do a lot of CO2 mitigation. For us, that's kind of we work on the low hanging fruit, things like waste heat recovery. We've got over 32 waste heat recovery units on the ground right now. That makes up for 43 megawatts worth of just free heat that can run our operations. That's just purely coming out of efficiency. So I look forward to working with this panel, talking about ways that we can continue to reduce emissions, continue to work on ways that technology can help, and continue to find ways to collaborate with the community. We think that things such as that waste heat example I just brought up is a strong opportunity to work with First Nations and our local communities to find ways to use some of the heat that we have to add value and provide value to the community as a whole.
Terrific. Well, thanks, Scott. Scott brought us the upstream point of view, and next we'll hand the ball on to David Bennett, who will talk about downstream with Fortis. Dave?
Hi, everyone, and like you all, I would have loved to have been there in Prince George, meeting you all in person. I'm here in White Rock on the traditional territory of the Semiahmoo people, and delighted to be part of this panel. Yeah, I was just trying to think about how to talk about the path that we're on. It was interesting, reflecting what Susanna Pierce said in her keynote. We kind of approach things the same way, and I think it's important to kind of look at the history of where we've been and where we're going, to kind of get an idea of how far we've come. Just first, a little bit about FortisBC. Most of you who are from BC would know us because we send you a gas bill or an electricity bill if you're in the interior. We are part of the Fortis group of companies, which owns mostly electric utilities across North America and into the Caribbean. And I'm part of the gas utility, which we deliver gas to just over 1 million homes and businesses here in British Columbia. So yeah, it's interesting when you look back. And my position here right now is the Director of Renewable Gas and Low Carbon Fuels. So we've been on this path for about 15 years, and like Susanna mentioned, initially when we were looking at this, and she said the same thing with Shell, we were trying to look at seeing signals from the government. Climate change is an issue. We have to think about carbon. We were really just trying to develop tools so we'd be part of the solution and not part of the problem, knowing that we were carrying a product that produced carbon. And going back, really around the time the carbon tax came in, we'd been working on that. We were the first utility in North America, gas utility, to offer biomethane as a product that was available widely to our customers in 2011. And we've been working down that path since that time. And again, what Susanna had to say, 5% of the energy in the world. Wow, that's a lot. But when we looked at our emissions, we were like, well, the real problem, we deliver 21% of the energy in British Columbia. So, if we just worried about Fortis's emissions, they're really insignificant compared to the energy we deliver to our customers. So we started focusing on those Scope 3 emissions. What's the best way of getting those emissions under control and bringing them down? And we really think that the gas system, in conjunction with other energy systems like electricity, can work in cooperation to actually lower emissions. And so in 2019, we announced a program which we call our Clean Growth Pathway to 2050. And we made commitments about reducing our customers' emissions by 30% by 2030. I know I sometimes get people saying, well, only 30%. It's a target, and as I'm going to mention, we're actually probably going to be on that by 2030. But when we announced that in 2019, we were one of the first utilities, I believe, in the world, certainly this first gas utility in Canada, to really make commitments towards Scope 3 emissions. And the 4 pillars that we see for doing that are, lo and behold, the things we were working on to try and be helpful. So energy efficiency, global LNG. So we were the first gas company first company in Canada actually shipped gas over LNG over to China, and we did that via shipping containers, isotainers, and we've been doing that for several years. Zero and low carbon transportation. So we own an electricity company as well as the gas company. So we're very focused on low carbon transportation, and in passenger vehicles, that's largely electric vehicles. But in heavy duty transportation and shipping, that's LNG. And this past year, we had a first demonstration of running renewable gas in a ship. So C-SPAN ran their ship for a week on renewable LNG, so RLNG. And so the last pillar is the pillar that I'm responsible for, which is renewable gas. And we initially started out with biomethane. Now we're looking at other gases. We think hydrogen is going to be increasingly important part of the picture. And if you think about it, we've been working on renewable natural gas for the last 10 years. It takes some time to get these things up and running. Hydrogen probably will be the next thing to come along, and we see both of them as being very important in the energy transition. Just to give you a sense, we initially had set for ourselves a 5% target in 2015. That was increased in 2017 and has been enabled in legislation now of 15% of our supply. So that's about 30 petajoules of gas for those of you who do that kind of counting by 2030. And in the recent announcement by the government of their pathway to 2030 in November, we could see that probably doubling, if not being higher. So we certainly believe that these things are very achievable, and the gas system is an important tool for delivering low carbon energy. And just like you can with an electric system, you can actually reduce the carbon content of the gas system. And that's my sole focus right now. So I'm really looking forward to the panel. Just going out to 2050, we see largely that we will have low carbon gases within our delivering to our customers. So whether that's renewable gas or hydrogen, or also some of the other things we're looking at. And I often give people a history lesson when they ask me, well, how possible is it for you to be delivering hydrogen? Well, the first utility in BC of any kind was actually in Victoria, and they delivered town gas in wooden pipes to the town of Victoria. And guess what town gas is? It's basically hydrogen. So we're just going back to doing something we've done before. So anyway, I'm looking forward to the panel, and thanks, Tim.
Great, thanks, David. The next speaker is Ben Goodyear of Canfor, that's going to talk about the opportunities they're working on and how they're seeing the future. So Ben, on to you.
Thanks, Tim. Hello, and thank you all for inviting me to join the panel today. I'm fortunate to be joining from the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples. And as Canfor, we're privileged to operate on many diverse Indigenous territories within the province of British Columbia. We're grateful to work with and build partnerships with Indigenous peoples in these areas. Let me start by saying we're emerging or entering a really exciting time for forestry. We've obviously had our ups and downs over the years, but the shift to an increasingly decarbonized world creates exciting opportunities for our sector. As a natural process for capturing carbon, forests play a critical role in our global efforts to decarbonize. They provide a resource which is sustainable, which is renewable, and can produce carbon products which can displace traditionally fossil-based products. Our industry is at a turning point, and one where we believe we will be recognized as being a meaningful contributor to decarbonization. Innovation will be key. At Canfor, we see opportunities to advance our decarbonized efforts across our value chain, from harvesting all the way through to product development and broader sequestration. We're envisioning and building a portfolio of opportunities with varying degrees of impact and likelihood of success. I'd like to share a few of those today as we talk through how Canfor is approaching this. The first pillar for Canfor is really continuous improvement and optimization. This is the bread and butter for any manufacturing or resource company. The big shift that we anticipate here is that as energy becomes more expensive, as carbon is given a greater value, marginal products that are uneconomic today will become much more economic. And this will be a meaningful driver for decarbonization, or the next leg of decarbonization in our facilities. The second pillar for Canfor ties to our solid wood products business. Canfor focuses much of its efforts on producing high quality, high value lumber, products for the home building and retail segments. This focus won't change. However, we're seeing exciting opportunities to displace non-renewable materials such as steel and concrete, which are highly carbon intensive. This will be achieved through mass timber. Products like cross-laminated timber, glue-laminated timber, these are products which have been established over the years, and we're seeing greater and greater uptick. The products can lock carbon at a rate of 1 ton of CO2 per cubic meter of wood, and are increasingly being recognized for their environmental benefits. From tall timber towers to long span structures, innovative wood engineering and architecture is demonstrating that mass timber can play a huge role in supporting our clean BC goals. The third pillar for Canfor is a focus on the other half of the log. In 2020, Canfor began development of its bioinnovation team. This team is very much focused on the 50% of a tree which is not converted into finished lumber. While some of that material already goes into our pulp and paper products, we're investigating a diverse set of opportunities and products to create more value. This looks at the physical attributes of our pulp, our sawdust, our tree bark, and looks to optimize what we can do with this product. The breadth of opportunities is immense. Many products traditionally sourced from petroleum can be substituted with a product sourced from the raw materials of a tree. This includes adhesives, various chemicals, insulation, packaging, a number of potential product opportunities. The most advanced of Canfor's activities under this particular pillar is its joint venture partnership with Australia-based Licella in RBS Biotech. RBS Biotech is preparing for the first-of-a-kind commercial biofuel facility to be located in Prince George that will take biomass feedstock currently sourced from nearby facilities and convert it into renewable biocrudes, which will be destined for the transportation market. In time, we envision opportunities for RBS to produce specialty chemicals and biomaterials. RBS is the most innovative element in our portfolio, and one we will believe will play a growing role in our company. In providing a glimpse into some of the possibilities we're pursuing and how Canfor sees its role in helping to achieve our Clean Target BC targets. Thank you, and I look forward to the discussion.
Great. Well, thank you, Ben. And panelists, this now brings us to where I get to pose a few questions as the audience will start working through the app, through the Horvath app, and I believe that'll be coming up on the screen here in a little bit. But I'm going to kick things off with a question for David. Obviously, I represent the upstream natural gas industry. As you're transitioning and working on many of these technologies, what future does natural gas have in the fuels of the future that you guys are currently working on? Do you have any insights as to where you think it'll be in 2050?
Well, there's a couple of things. One, natural gas is the lowest carbon, cleanest form of fossil fuel still around. So, when we put natural gas into like transportation applications, you're getting emissions reductions, significant emissions reductions there. But longer term, methane is a good carrier of things like hydrogen, and I think that it will be a feedstock for hydrogen in the longer term. And I'm not sure that people have really totally got their heads around that yet. I mean, we're starting to see the emergence of things like blue hydrogen projects in Alberta, and which the feedstock is methane. But also I think, even I've talked about things like LNG. It might be more efficient to ship LNG overseas and then sequester the carbon or bring the carbon back somehow. So I think methane and natural gas is going to have a long future, both conventionally used, but also in some of the as an important feedstock in some of these new applications.
Great, thanks, Dave. Just building on that, Scott, some of the biggest reductions we've seen in greenhouse gas emissions in Canada has actually been shifting to more natural gas in our electricity system. And the same is true in the United States and in several other countries. As Canada is building out its infrastructure, Susanna Pierce talked earlier about the major project on our west coast that Shell is leading. Tourmaline are you guys looking at global opportunities to displace coal, which sadly is seeing a resurgence in many places right now? And Susanna Pierce also spoke of Article 6. I don't know if that's something that has been on your radar, but if you had any comments about natural gas playing that role, I'd be interested.
Yeah, so I would say one of the things that we think are most excited about, and I guess arguably has had the largest impact on reducing emissions on the planet, has been displacing higher sources of like coal or other high sources of carbon fuels with natural gas. So it's done very well in the past, and we expect it to continue on. I think people don't really appreciate how important natural gas storage is to how we heat our homes in a cold environment as well. We essentially are taking natural gas and putting it in the ground and storing it all summer long, like little squirrels essentially, to be ready for the winter. And that battery is so incredible and so important on things like it'll help the renewables. So it's going to help solar and wind who have intermittent power issues, so we can have electricity. It's going to help displace more coal locally in Canada and the US. You actually see US is actually starting to pick up coal here recently. And we are also looking at exporting LNG as well. We're a large supplier and a large operator in BC, and we're looking to do our own exports as well there as well. So we think natural gas is here for the long term, and to go along with that, we think that there's going to be a lot of value in how green Canada's natural gas is. We've done some work certifying the full life cycle of our natural gas, and we believe that it's going to be second to none as far as what the life cycle carbon intensity of gas coming out of BC, for example, is. So we think there's actually going to be a value proposition to be able to sell our gas with a essentially responsibly sourced gas that has a premium compared to normal places around the world. So yes, I think it's got a big part to reduce emissions by displacing coal. And yes, absolutely, I think it has a place for Canada to be a leader in world emissions reduction by using Canadian natural gas.
Perfect. Thanks, Scott. Ben, you talked about some pretty interesting technology advancements there. What are some of the policy incentives or direction that would be very helpful to ensure that you can keep on that path of development? Anything that you would point out for the audience as far as policy direction or asks that innovation would enable this innovation?
I think speaking about Arbius in particular, and maybe how Canfor is viewing some biofuel opportunities, a really big driver for this has been the BC Low Carbon Fuel Standard. This is a policy that was enacted over 10 years ago and has been gradually increasing the requirements for renewables. And it provides a material economic incentive to pursue these innovations. Innovations always, the beginning of the innovation is always quite expensive. And so policy is really helpful in getting these things off the ground. And as they scale, they become increasingly economic. So that's really a big piece. And I think BC's done a great job on that for the low carbon fuel standard. I could envision a world where we see some of that for other materials or composites or products that are out there. It may not be a regulatory instrument that helps incent that activity, but I do see the role for government policy to help shape some of these transitions. And I referenced the BC low carbon fuel standard, which I think has been very successful.
Excellent. Thank you. Lana, you talked about a couple specific projects in your opening comments, and you also talked about relationship building and how that engagement can be done very well and be very helpful. Do you have any examples of how building the engagement capacity with Indigenous communities can further enable innovation anywhere that kind of you point to specifically?
It was a few years ago that I had an opportunity to have a conversation with Michelle Ash, who was well known in the mining sector, working in technology. And at that time, she was talking about how do we move innovation forward in the mining sector. And so our conversation was really it's impossible to have innovation successfully without working with communities. So it's sometimes hard to visualize grassroots communities working together with high-tech people, but I think it has to happen in order that we can advance these ideas and these projects going forward. And I think that Geoscience BC is certainly learning from their experiences, but also learning, what could have been done better, perhaps. And so, we are doing things like a geophysical survey in the northwestern part of BC. But in order to do that properly, we worked with the Tahltan. And so as we go about, with different projects in BC, we are learning that it is important to have those conversations, to have engagement. And if it means signing an agreement to go forward, we will do that too. But I think what it ultimately does is it helps to build a level of trust between industry, between science, and between the First Nation communities. And so when we start to build that trust, it's amazing what can come out of that level of trust that is built. So for instance, and maybe not particularly, with the project in mind, but we are beginning to have conversations about hydrogen opportunities as we move forward. And those conversations are with industry, in terms of how Geoscience BC can help establish the research that is necessary to move a project forward. But then how do we include First Nations as partners in those particular projects? And we're also looking at earth science research needed for carbon capture, utilization, and storage. So as these things start to take to grow and to gather momentum, communities, Indigenous communities, can be a big part of these discussions. And we're seeing that in other sectors. And when I say other, I mean, especially in mining, as Canada has their list of 31 critical minerals. And there is significant momentum to move forward and to bring these opportunities for mines in Canada online sooner than later, because Canada envisions themselves as a leader in this particular sector. So how can we do that? And I think the realization that we have to find a way to work better with communities. And we see that in some of the mining companies where they have made those forays and working together with communities with a lot of positive outcomes. And, they didn't wait for policy, from a government level to move those conversations and move those, how they might work together better forward. They just did it because they felt it was necessary and it was something that they wanted to do. And I think we are slowly coming to that as Canadians. There is a desire to want to understand all of what has brought us here today. You know, we talk about the discovery of the unmarked graves this past summer. We talk about the how it's been challenging for some Indigenous communities in Canada to even provide clean drinking water or power that is not fueled by diesel to their community members. So how do we begin to grow together and to lessen that gap? And I think people are really starting to understand what it is that Indigenous people have faced. And I think there will be more Canadians who will want to see a positive change. And certainly, industry is in every way forward, providing those opportunities to lessen that gap and to make things happen better for all Canadians.
I think that's a great perspective. That it's important for government to play leadership roles and to put, structures in place. But some of the greatest successes are where communities and business and Indigenous communities are coming together because both are seeing a benefit in working together. And I think we're seeing a lot more of those stories, and that's good. It speaks to the strength of Canada on its own. I am going to ask the folks in the background if they would put up the Whova sheet, and we will start working through that. Maybe just because I can't read and talk at the same time, I might just pose a question to Dave as I dive into some of these questions. But Dave, you talked about some of the different options. Could you give us a quick reflection on maybe where we stand today or where you think we'd be in 10 years on the cost? The consumer has to pay for the heating of their home, and if it's raw natural gas, it's going to have a different price than if it's a large proportion of biogas or hydrogen. Could you give us just a bit of a reflection of kind of where each of those different products would stack up today, or maybe where you think they'll be in 10 years?
Yeah, I think the main thing to remember is when you're comparing these things, you have to compare them to other low carbon sources of energy. So, if we look at all the different things we do, we stack that up against what we see as kind of the key competitor, which is electricity, and all of the things we're doing come in at something competitive with that. So yes, we do see increasing costs. And we're going to see increasing costs just from carbon taxes increasing. But our view is that rather than, and not to say there's anything wrong with carbon taxes, because they do get people they do give an indication to go and do something else. But the types of things that we'll be doing with converting over to these new forms of energy actually do reduce emissions. They're not just a tax. So you end up paying more, but you're also getting the thing that you were looking for. And then, as we get out longer term, when you start looking at things like hydrogen, just because of the new technology coming along, I think we could actually see costs dropping. So, we know that renewable natural gas, that it takes a certain amount of processing, whether it's landfill gas or taking municipal waste, or there's a cost to collecting that and doing something with it. So it's going to be inherently more expensive than regular methane. But when we look at some of these new technologies coming out, I mean, I'm very hopeful in the pyrolysis, where you could think of maybe being able to ship methane closer to the customer and then put it through a reaction that creates solid carbon, and you end up with a methane-like price, if you think of it, when you get your hydrogen coming out the other end. And that's what I think all of us have to strive for, because at the end of the day, we know that our customers, that the cost is very important to them, and there's a lot of people who have trouble paying their bills even at the current prices. But we also know that we can't continue to just put carbon into the air, so we have to come up with other types of solutions.
Yeah. No, thank you for that perspective. So I'll just start at the top here. Both the federal and provincial governments have identified hydrogen as a key opportunity. Where do you see the opportunity for hydrogen in northern BC, and how do we seize it? So I think I might just rephrase this to a similar question to what I asked Ben earlier. Are there any specific policy drivers that would enable a real push to hydrogen in Northeast BC? And maybe I would open that up to the panel in general.
I can jump in there.
Perfect.
So I think there's something really interesting happening in the policy space. All of a sudden, you've got three different people on the panel here, one being upstream, one being utility, and one being in forestry, and we're all looking at biogas. And that wouldn't be happening if there wasn't something like the low carbon fuel standard that's kind of a policy, but a policy that's driving change. So that low carbon fuel standard is going to drive some hydrogen, it's going to drive some other pieces, and it's driving us to make good decisions in general. So that price on carbon, and whether you call it an offset or a performance credit or a certification or whatever you want to use in order to say there's a value proposition for reducing your carbon intensity, that is allowing us to make those changes today. It's not waiting for a new regulation to say thou shall or the max cutoff should be this. It's actually just saying, here's a value. It doesn't matter how you do it. Do it with electricity, do it with hydrogen, do it with renewable natural gas, do it with whatever you kind of please. Put the right solution in the right place, and then show that value proposition. And then if you get more money for it, we'll all do it, and we'll do it early, and you don't have to force us to. So that, I think, is really driving policy and will help hydrogen as well.
I just to add to that, the BC government came out with their hydrogen strategy in July, and that it's a good read. It's fairly easy to go through, but there's a lot of good material in there. And from the downstream end, really in the long run, hydrogen could go into just about any application that we deliver natural gas into, even into people's homes. And think of fireplaces and burners on their stove and things like that. It seems it seems like science fiction, but there's actually people working, and there's utilities who are testing out hydrogen homes and things like that. But the big problem, and on the policy side, the government actually in May put in a change in the regulation that allows us to buy hydrogen the same way we buy renewable natural gas. Our issue is, we could buy hydrogen, but what do we do with it? We need to build a market for it. So that's what we're really working hard on. We think initially industry is probably the most sensible place to work on, because you get more carbon reductions with talking to fewer people. But in the long run, it could really just about go anywhere.
I would even propose a better target for hydrogen is on the higher cost, higher carbon fuels, even going beyond natural gas. Like, I do agree it could go into homes and take on heat and things like that, but it could also take on heavy haul transportation or other forms of higher cost, easier to kind of get into those industries as well, and really make a more meaningful difference, since it is ultimately an energy carrier. And it does come with a cost in energy efficiency to convert that natural gas into hydrogen.
Absolutely. All right, well, maybe we'll go to the questions again. So, to the panel, do you believe that Canada's bold policies are in alignment with the demand for our resources? Locally, nationally, and internationally, considering BC's resource sector continues to use and achieve best practices. So, yeah, I like the putting the not just within Canada, but these are global challenges, and how is Canada positioning itself relative to our competitors? And I think we should also look at, are we remaining competitive in meeting this global challenge? So I open that up broadly again as well.
I'll jump in again and get things started. Sorry. So I think the policies are working, and I wouldn't necessarily go and complain too much about the policies putting us at a disadvantage. But I think we're at a critical point now where we've kind of found we've put a price on carbon. We're starting to find ways to build value up or for carbon. We're going to start putting Canada at a disadvantage if we go too much further. And we've kind of found a lever where things are working. So the offset program kind of rewards good behaviors and kind of gives a carrot to people to go and do something different or change behavior. So I would say we're at a critical point here. It's not about pushing all the levers now and putting a restrictive policy or other things on top of that. It's now about kind of doubling down on the things that we've seen working already and finding ways for Canada to get true value for that. And people are willing to pay more money for a Canadian product that's cleaner and better. We're selling offsets off into Europe right now for some of the work we're doing in BC, reducing emissions at our gas plants. So I would say policy's working, but we need to be very careful, and it's not a time to just dump a whole bunch more hard policy restrictions on it. It's now a time to really find a way to take advantage of the policies we've already got in place.
Perfect. And Ben, I might jump over to you that you guys are looking at the global perspective, and as you're developing these technologies, is Canada where the economics work best, or is it a place where we're challenged? And how does that affect your broader business, either in Canada or globally as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a complicated question. I think from a carbon perspective, every market is somewhat at a different state. Europe has been the furthest along on the energy profile for a long time, and they're probably further along in some of the carbon elements. I think we see Canada being quite advanced in the carbon program. Maybe the U.S. a little bit less so. So those are our three kind of core regions. So we see what we anticipate are different solutions for the different regions, right? So the policies and the regulations will drive different activity at different geographic spots. I do think, just back to the prior question on the policy piece, I think the Western world has decided that we're going to go down this path to a decarbonized world. People can debate it. I personally just say, hey, that's where we're going. And so I view us as a nation trying to get ahead. It's imperative for us to be competitive. And ideally, we create global champions because we act a little bit earlier. So that's really, I think, my personal aspiration. I think, but speaking for Canfor probably hopes that as well. But yeah, the global footprints are all different, and the answers will be different in each region.
Perfect. Thank you. And maybe we'll go back to the questions. We have just under 2 minutes, so we'll probably have to move it a little bit quick. But our panel, can you comment on any new technologies or practices in decarbonization strategies that we can share with local vendors to help them identify new work opportunities in demand services? I might open this up to the panel in general, but the one that kind of jumps out at me is the fueling of ships, and I know that's something that Fortis has been doing with compressed LNG for quite some time, and now you were saying even with renewable. But maybe I would just open it up more broadly if there were any other examples or additions, or that one flushed out a little further.
Well, maybe I'll start with the rest are thinking. Yeah, we see that as a way of exporting a technology that we've. It's not only developed here, but we were actually the first company in the world to do an ship bunkering via truck, which is a lot more cost-effective way of putting LNG on a ship than having to build a dock and barge and everything. And you think of some of the smaller nations around the world, how important something like that could be to them. So there's little things like that. And we think that Vancouver could actually be developed into a major bunkering hub for the world. I mean, these ships are crossing the ocean. We have a competitive advantage in our natural gas right now, but in the long run, that could be hydrogen as well. These ships, you just need the barge to pull up and fuel up and go out to the ships wherever they are. They're passing right by Vancouver. Vancouver's the second largest port by tonnage, I think, in North America. So But just looking at it another way, I mean, another form of decarbonization is energy efficiency, and there's a whole pile of people at work right now putting in, more efficient furnaces and windows and all kinds of things. So the decarbonization runs the whole gamut from these multi-million-dollar projects with shipping all the way down to the things you can do in your home to make them more efficient.
Absolutely.
I know we're out of time, but can I jump in with a really quick direct answer to that?
Sure.
Direct answer, the Natural Gas Innovation Fund is a collaboration of 7 producers or 8 producers now that donate their money to help those community members find clean tech opportunities that can be used in our sector. So absolutely, if you're looking to do that, we've been doing that every day, and we've got tons of examples. So if you want to be a community member or service provider in the area that wants to get into clean tech, we are there to support.
Perfect. Well, I think that's probably a great place to jump off the panel. I think we had a great conversation. There's a lot of optimism, a lot of work being done, and an acknowledgement there's a lot more work to be done. But I certainly have confidence in the many different parties that we heard from today and the colleagues we have across our industries. So with that, thank you very much, and I would hand things back to the organizers.
Thanks to Tim McMillan, and thank you to our panelists for your participation in our session this afternoon.